Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at DNA.
Right.
And we've got some fascinating excerpts that you've all shared with us
Yes.
about all the amazing things DNA does. You know, we all think we know the basics, but
Yeah.
this deep dive is going to go way beyond that textbook stuff
Yes.
to uncover some really cool things about DNA.
I think you're in for a real treat. DNA's influence is so vast, it really touches everything from like evolution to this cutting edge tech that's being developed today.
Right. So let's do a real quick recap just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Sure.
Um, Everyone remembers that big discovery of the double helix back in 1953 by Watson and Crick. But DNA is much more than just like a blueprint. It's constantly active, participating in almost every aspect of life. How does that even work?
You know, I think a good analogy might be to imagine a really bustling city. DNA is like the central library holding all the blueprints.
Yeah, right.
Right? But it's also the construction crews out there making copies of those blueprints for new buildings, the repair teams fixing any damage, and even the traffic controllers directing the flow of all the materials.
That's a great analogy.
Huh.
So it's not just about, inheritance. DNA is actively shaping our bodies and even our responses.
Every second.
Every second.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how much control do we really have?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Take DNA replication, for example. Before a cell divides, it needs a perfect copy of its DNA, right?
Sure.
And so this process has to be incredibly precise and make sure that each new cell gets a full set of instructions.
Well, it's like hitting copy paste on like the most important document ever.
That's a great way to put it.
But what happens if there are typos or, errors in that copying process?
Those typos, as you call them, those are what we call mutations.
Okay.
And I've got to say, mutations get kind of a bad rap. They're seen as something negative, but I've read that they're not always harmful. Could you maybe explain that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. While some mutations can definitely lead to disease, a lot of them are neutral or even beneficial. They're like the raw material for evolution.
Right.
Providing the variation that natural selection acts upon.
Exactly. Think about antibiotic resistance in bacteria. A mutation might give a bacterium the ability to actually survive an antibiotic.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And then it reproduces, passing on that beneficial mutation. And then all of a sudden, you've got a whole population of these resistant bacteria. It's like a perfect example of how DNA plays this crucial role in adaptation.
So a typo in the DNA could actually be an advantage.
That's
a fascinating twist. It makes you wonder, though, where did this incredible molecule even come from?
That is a great question. But here's a real mind bender for you.
Okay.
Where did DNA even come from in the first place? It turns out it probably evolved from a much simpler molecule, something called RNA.
Okay.
So imagine like a world where RNA did everything. It stored genetic information and acted as an enzyme, which is pretty wild.
Okay, so that's the RNA world hypothesis.
Right. Yeah.
I've heard about this.
Exactly.
It's this idea that early life relied on RNA for both like genetic info and that catalytic activity.
Yeah.
How did DNA take over?
Well, DNA is much more stable.
Right.
And it's much more efficient at storing information, especially over long periods of time. So it's kind of like upgrading from a floppy disk to a hard drive, if you remember those.
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
And this transition, over millions of years, it paved the way for the complex life that we see today. But the story doesn't stop there, right?
Right.
There's this phenomenon called horizontal gene transfer that totally changes the way we think about inheritance.
Horizontal gene transfer. I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
It's like genes jumping between organisms, right?
You got it. And it's actually very common in bacteria where they can actually share genes, even across different species.
Oh, wow.
And this is actually one way that antibiotic resistance spreads so quickly. One bacterium develops resistance, and it can share those genes with its neighbors.
It's like a bacterial internet or something.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
So it's not just parent to offspring inheritance. Genes can take a detour and hop onto a completely different organism. That kind of challenges that traditional view of evolution as this slow, gradual process, doesn't it?
It really does. And then there's evolutionary developmental biology, or evo-devo for short.
Okay, evo-zigo.
Yeah, and this field focuses on how changes in DNA during development can lead to the evolution of totally different body shapes and structures. Think about the incredible transformation from dinosaurs to birds,
Wow.
all driven by changes in DNA.
So we're talking about the big picture here, like small changes in DNA over millions of years,
Exactly.
leading to these massive transformations in body shape and DNA is the architect of all of that.
It's the source of variation, the fuel for adaptation, and
Well,
ultimately the blueprint for life itself.
oh,
But DNA's influence goes way beyond just basic biology. It's revolutionizing fields like forensics and even medicine.
right. DNA fingerprinting, they're using that to solve crimes, identify suspects, and even exonerate the wrongly accused.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like DNA's this microscopic detective leaving clues at every crime scene.
I like that, yeah.
And what about in medicine? DNA is playing a big role, especially with genetic testing.
Huge role.
By analyzing your DNA, doctors can diagnose diseases, predict your risk for certain conditions,
And
and
absolutely.
personalize treatment plans.
Totally. It gives you so much knowledge about your own health and your future.
It's empowering
Yeah, for sure.
to have that knowledge.
Yeah.
And what about gene therapy? Heard about CRISPR-Cas9?
Oh, yeah.
It's like this amazing tool that can edit genes.
It's revolutionary.
Is that like the future of medicine?
A CRISPR-Cas9 is definitely a game changer. It's like having a pair of molecular scissors, allowing scientists to target and actually modify specific genes.
Wow.
And so it holds this immense potential, especially for treating all sorts of genetic disorders. But it also raises, really important ethical questions that we need to think about very carefully.
All right, we're getting into an era where we can rewrite the code of life itself.
Exactly.
And that's a huge responsibility.
For sure.
Seems like we're only scratching the surface of what DNA can do.
We're really just getting started. DNA technology is also revolutionizing agriculture with things like GMOs, genetically modified organisms.
Right? GMOs, I've heard a lot about those.
Yeah.
It's all about altering the DNA of crops, right?
Right.
To introduce like pest resistance or enhanced nutrition.
Yeah, it could potentially increase food production and solve some of the food security challenges that we're facing.
Of course, there's always a debate around GMOs.
Rightly so, yeah.
But there's no question that DNA technology has the power to change how we feed the world.
I agree.
And I've also read that DNA is being used to protect biodiversity.
Oh, absolutely.
How does that work?
Well, by analyzing DNA samples, scientists can actually identify individual animals.
Oh, wow.
They can monitor their populations and understand their genetic diversity.
Oh, that's cool.
Right, and all that information is absolutely crucial for developing effective conservation strategies.
So it's like DNA is a secret weapon in the fight to preserve life on Earth.
That's a great way to put it.
It's amazing how this one molecule has such a profound impact on so many different aspects of our world.
It really is.
It makes you realize that DNA isn't just a scientific concept.
No,
It's like a fundamental part of our lives, our history, and our future.
that's a great point. And what's even more fascinating is that we're still uncovering its secrets. There's so much more to learn about DNA. And with each new discovery, we get this deeper understanding of life itself.
You've definitely piqued my curiosity. What are some of the biggest mysteries that scientists are still trying to unravel when it comes to DNA? What's next for DNA research?
Well, one area that's really hot right now is epigenetics. And this is all about how our experiences can actually change the way our genes work without actually altering the DNA sequence.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it's like having a cellular switchboard.
So it's not just about the genes we inherit, but what we do and the things we experience during our lives.
That's exactly right. It really changes how we think about genetics. It means our environment and our experiences can influence our genes. It blows the mind, doesn't it?
It really does. And then there's what they call the dark matter of DNA. Turns out that most of our DNA doesn't even code for proteins. So what's all that extra DNA doing there is one of the biggest puzzles in genetics. I'm definitely intrigued. What are some of the theories about the function of this non-coding DNA?
Well, scientists believe that some of it might be involved in regulating gene expression. So they're acting like switches, turning genes on or off at specific times or in specific tissues.
So it's like the control panel for the genome, fine-tuning the activity of our genes.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. And then some of this dark matter might have structural roles like maintaining the integrity of chromosomes or even organizing the DNA within the nucleus.
So our DNA is like a complex city with blueprints, construction crews, repair teams, traffic controllers, and even a control panel to keep everything running smoothly.
That's a great analogy, yeah. It's mind-boggling to think about all the activity happening in our cells.
And it gets even wilder. Some non-coding DNA might be remnants of ancient viral infections.
Isn't that crazy?
How's that even possible?
Well, over millions of years, viruses have actually managed to integrate their genetic material into our genomes.
Wow.
Yeah, and some of these viral sequences have been co-opted by our cells and now play important roles in our biology.
So our DNA is a mosaic of our own genetic heritage and like these remnants of ancient viral invaders.
Exactly. It really highlights the dynamic nature of DNA and
It
evolution.
really shows you how interconnected life is. But there's another frontier that's even more mind-blowing: synthetic biology.
Oh, yeah.
What is that exactly?
Well, it's basically the science of building brand new organisms from scratch, using DNA as the code. Imagine designing and creating life forms with specific functions, like producing biofuels or breaking down pollutants.
So we're talking about creating artificial life.
Yeah, pretty much.
That sounds both exhilarating and a little terrifying.
For sure. It's a powerful technology.
It makes you wonder about the ethical boundaries.
It's a crucial question, right? What are the ethical boundaries of this power? It seems like we're not just discovering life, but we're potentially designing it.
And that means we need to tread carefully and really think about the consequences of what we're doing.
Absolutely. We have a huge responsibility to use this technology wisely.
It's a powerful reminder that with great power comes great responsibility. But it's also an incredible opportunity to learn more about life itself and maybe even solve some of the world's biggest problems.
Couldn't agree more. The future of DNA research is full of amazing possibilities. Personalized medicine, gene therapy, synthetic biology, and who knows what else lies ahead. It's an exciting time to be alive.
You're absolutely right. It's an exciting time to be alive and witness these incredible breakthroughs.
I can't wait to see what we uncover next.
It's just incredible to think about the sheer power we're uncovering within DNA, you know?
It really is.
But as we go deeper into manipulating DNA, editing genes, even creating artificial life,
Right.
I can't help but wonder about like the ethical boundaries. Where do we even draw the line?
Well, it's a question that scientists and ethicists are wrestling with all the time, constantly. As our understanding of DNA grows,
Yeah,
so does our responsibility to use that knowledge ethically. The potential benefits are massive, but we have to be really careful.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Take genetic testing, for example. It
Yeah.
offers these amazing insights into our health. But what about privacy?
Right.
What if insurance companies or employers could use our genetic information against us?
That's a very valid concern. We definitely need strong legal protections to make sure that genetic information is used responsibly and ethically. Individuals should have the right to control their own genetic data and decide how it's used. Imagine a world where your genetic predisposition to certain conditions could be used to deny you opportunities.
Wow, yeah,
That's a future that we really want to avoid.
absolutely. And what about CRISPR-Cas9 and gene editing?
Right.
It's revolutionary for treating genetic diseases.
It is.
But where does therapy end and enhancement begin?
Right.
Could we end up in a world where people are using gene editing to like enhance their intelligence or physical abilities?
It's a slippery slope, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
And what are the societal implications of that?
That's the core of the debate.
Yeah,
Where do we draw the line between treating disease and enhancing human capabilities? And what about those unintended consequences?
right.
Like, what if we make changes to the genome that we can't reverse or that have unforeseen impacts on future generations?
It's like opening Pandora's box.
That's a great way to put it.
We need to proceed with so much caution, do thorough research, and have like open public discussions about the ethical implications before we unleash this technology on the world.
Couldn't agree more. And then there's synthetic biology. You know, if we can create artificial life, what does that mean for our understanding of life itself? What responsibilities do we have towards these synthetic organisms that we're creating?
Right? Yeah.
These are huge philosophical questions with no easy answers.
It seems like the more we learn about DNA,
Yeah,
the more complex the ethical landscape becomes.
it does.
It's a reminder that all these scientific advancements should always be paired with really thoughtful ethical considerations.
Precisely. But amidst all the complexities and the ethical considerations, we can't lose sight of the wonder and beauty of DNA. This molecule is the foundation of life, the source of all our diversity, and the engine of evolution. It connects us to every living thing on this planet.
That's true.
Yeah.
Thinking about like the vastness of that connection across species and even through time, that's pretty awe-inspiring. Our DNA carries within it like echoes of our ancestors and a record of the evolutionary journey that's brought us to this point.
That journey's still unfolding.
Right.
Who knows what groundbreaking discoveries are waiting for us? What ethical dilemmas will we face? It's an amazing time to be alive, to witness the unfolding of this DNA revolution.
It really is. But as you said, it's also a time for reflection and careful consideration. We
Absolutely.
need to approach this new era of biology with a sense of wonder, but also with a deep respect for the power and complexity of life. Speaking of which, let's dive back into some of the mysteries that scientists are still trying to solve. Earlier, we were talking about the dark matter of DNA,
Right.
those non-coding portions of the genome. What are some of the latest findings in that area?
Scientists are finding some really fascinating things about this non-coding DNA. For example, they're finding that some non-coding sequences play a crucial role in regulating gene expression. They're like switches, turning genes on or off at specific times or in specific tissues.
So it's like they're the control panel for the genome,
Exactly.
fine-tuning the activity of our genes based on like various factors.
That's right. It adds another layer of complexity to the already intricate workings of DNA.
And remember those methyl groups that we talked about earlier? I've read they can attach to DNA and like influence whether a gene is switched on or off too. Yeah, like
Absolutely.
placing a tiny sticky note on a gene
Right. That's a great way to put it.
to remind the cell whether it should be active or silent.
It's like a little reminder.
So it's not just the DNA sequence itself that matters.
No.
It's also these epigenetic modifications that can influence how genes are expressed.
Exactly.
It's a pretty radical shift in how we think about genetics. It means our environment and our experiences can actually influence our genes.
You got it. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for understanding how lifestyle choices, environmental exposures, even our emotional states can affect our health and well-being.
And it's not just limited to like our own lifetime either.
Yeah.
These modifications can be passed down to future generations too.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's both fascinating and a little daunting to think that our experiences could have a lasting impact on our children and grandchildren.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of life across generations.
Let's get back to the non-coding DNA. We talked about its role in regulating gene expression. What about the rest of that dark matter?
Right.
What are the other theories about what it's doing? It seems too vast to be simply junk, doesn't it?
You're absolutely right. And scientists are discovering that it's far from junk. Some of these non-coding regions may have structural roles like maintaining the integrity of chromosomes or organizing DNA within the nucleus. Think of it as the scaffolding that holds the entire genome together.
So it's not just about the information encoded in the genes themselves, but also the physical structure and organization of the DNA molecule.
Exactly. It's like the difference between having a library full of books and having a well-organized library where you can easily find the information you need. The non-coding DNA helps to keep the genome organized and functioning smoothly.
That makes sense. But you mentioned earlier that some non-coding DNA might be remnants of, like, ancient viral infections.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
How did viral DNA become a part of our genome?
Well, over millions of years, viruses have managed to integrate their genetic material into our genomes. And some of those viral sequences have been co-opted by our cells and now play important roles in our biology. It's a fascinating example of how evolution can take something seemingly harmful and turn it into something beneficial.
So our DNA is a mosaic of our own genetic heritage and the remnants of, like, ancient viral invaders. It's a reminder that our evolutionary history is full of surprises
There really is.
and that our genome is a constantly evolving tapestry.
A beautiful tapestry, yeah.
And this understanding of non-coding DNA is just one piece of the puzzle. There's still so much more to learn about how our genes are regulated and how they interact with our environment to shape who we are.
Absolutely. We're just scratching the surface.
It's incredible to think how far we've come in understanding DNA, but it feels like we're just getting started.
We really are. And one area that holds immense promise is personalized medicine.
Oh, personalized medicine.
Yeah, so by analyzing an individual's DNA sequence and their epigenetic profile, doctors can tailor treatments to their specific needs and predict their risk of developing certain diseases. It's about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare and towards more individualized and effective treatments.
Like having a customized healthcare plan based on your unique genetic makeup.
Exactly. It's really exciting.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What about gene therapy? Are there any breakthroughs on the horizon in terms of using gene editing to treat or even cure genetic diseases?
Gene therapy is such a rapidly evolving field. Scientists are developing new and more precise techniques to deliver genes to specific cells, potentially offering cures for diseases that were once considered incurable.
And earlier we talked about CRISPR-Cas9,
Right?
but Are there other gene editing tools that scientists are excited about? It seems like the more tools we have in our arsenal,
Yeah.
the better equipped we'll be to tackle these really complex genetic challenges.
You're absolutely right. There are a number of other gene editing technologies being developed, each with its own advantages and disadvantages. It's like having a toolbox full of molecular scissors,
Right.
each designed for a specific task.
It's not just about having one really powerful tool.
No.
It's about having like a diverse set of tools that allow us to really manipulate DNA with increasing precision and control.
Absolutely. And beyond treating diseases, scientists are also exploring ways to enhance human capabilities.
Enhance human capabilities, what does that mean?
For example, they're investigating ways to enhance muscle growth and repair, which could potentially offer treatments for muscular dystrophy and other muscle wasting diseases.
It's incredible to think that we might be able to not only cure diseases, but also improve human performance and potentially even extend lifespan.
Right. It's pretty amazing.
But as we talked about earlier, these advancements come with ethical considerations that we can't ignore.
Absolutely. As we gain more power over our own biology, we need to proceed thoughtfully and make sure that these technologies are used responsibly and ethically. It's a delicate balance, but one that we need to strike if we want to harness the full potential of DNA technology while safeguarding our values and our future.
Well said. And speaking of the future, there's another area where DNA is playing a surprising role: nanotechnology.
Oh, that's right.
You might be thinking, what does DNA have to do with building tiny machines and materials?
I know, it sounds strange.
Yeah,
But it turns out that DNA is an incredibly versatile building material at the nanoscale.
I'm intrigued. I know DNA has that double helix structure,
Right.
but how can it be used to build things? It seems like such a delicate molecule.
It is delicate, but it also has some remarkable properties. Remember how we talked about DNA having this natural tendency to self-assemble into specific shapes based on its base pairing rules? A always pairs with T, and C always pairs with G. Scientists are exploiting this property to create nanoscale structures and devices made of DNA.
So they're using DNA as like a molecular Lego set.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow.
Yeah, you can program these tiny building blocks to assemble themselves into specific shapes and structures. It's called DNA origami.
DNA origami. That's incredible.
I know, it's a cool name.
And researchers have created everything from tiny DNA boxes to these intricate DNA origami structures that can carry out specific functions.
It's really amazing what they can do. And what are some of the potential applications of these nanoscale DNA structures?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, what can we use this for?
Well, they could be used to deliver drugs to specific cells,
Okay.
create biosensors to detect diseases, or even build molecular computers. It's a rapidly growing field with enormous potential.
DNA never ceases to amaze me. It's not only the blueprint for life,
Yeah,
but also a powerful tool for building the future.
I agree.
It makes you wonder what other secrets this remarkable molecule holds.
It does, doesn't it? As we continue to explore its properties and potential, who knows what other surprises await us?
And on that note of wonder and possibility, I think it's time for us to take a little detour and explore one of the most mind-blowing applications of DNA technology: DNA data storage.
Ah, yes.
Have you ever heard of it?
Of course. It's one of the most exciting frontiers in information technology. The idea is to use DNA molecules to store vast amounts of digital information. Imagine storing everything from books and movies to historical archives and scientific data all in DNA.
It sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does, doesn't it?
But how is that even possible? DNA is the blueprint for life, not a hard drive. How can you store digital data in something that's meant to carry genetic information?
It's a fascinating concept. DNA is an incredibly efficient information storage system. Just think about it. All the genetic information needed to build and run a complex organism is packed into these tiny DNA molecules. If nature can use DNA to store the blueprint for life, why can't we use it to store our digital data?
That's a good point, but how does it actually work? Like, how do you convert digital data, which is made up of ones and zeros, into DNA, which is made up of those four bases, A, T, C, and G?
It's a pretty complex process.
Yeah.
But essentially, it involves encoding the ones and zeros of digital data into the four letters of the DNA code, A, T, C, and G. And then synthetic DNA molecules are created that represent that digital information. It's like translating digital language into the language of life.
It's mind-boggling to think about the sheer amount of information that you could store in DNA. And what about retrieving the data? How do you access it once it's stored in DNA?
Well, to retrieve the data, you simply sequence the DNA and decode it back into digital form. It's a relatively straightforward process,
Look,
and the technology for DNA sequencing is advancing rapidly.
this is incredible. It sounds like science fiction, but it's becoming a reality. Are there any real-world applications of DNA data storage yet?
Yeah, there are already some early examples. Researchers have stored images, text, and even a short film in DNA.
A whole film in DNA. That's amazing. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine the possibilities. It's like we're on the verge of a new era of data storage where we can archive information for millennia in a format that's both incredibly dense and incredibly durable.
Exactly. And DNA data storage has some significant advantages over traditional digital storage media. First, DNA is incredibly dense. You could theoretically store all the data in the world in just a few grams of DNA.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. We're talking about replacing giant data centers with something the size of a sugar cube.
Potentially, yes. And second, DNA is incredibly durable. It can last for thousands of years if it's stored properly. Think about all those fossils with preserved DNA from extinct creatures. We could create data archives that would last for generations.
It's like having a time capsule for information,
Yeah,
preserving our knowledge and culture for future generations.
exactly.
And what about data security? Is DNA data storage vulnerable to, like, hacking or corruption?
Well, DNA is incredibly stable and resistant to damage, unlike digital storage media, which can degrade over time. It's a very secure storage medium, especially if you consider all the advancements in encryption technologies. It would be very difficult for someone to hack into DNA data and steal or corrupt the information.
It sounds like the ultimate archival medium. It's incredible to think that the same molecule that holds the secrets of life could also hold the key to our digital future. It's a testament to the power and versatility of DNA.
It truly is. And this is just the beginning. As we continue to explore the potential of DNA technology, who knows what other groundbreaking discoveries await us? We're living in an era of unprecedented scientific advancement, and DNA is at the forefront of it all.
You know, it seems like every time we talk about DNA, we just uncover like another layer of complexity and possibility.
It's true.
It's not just about inheritance anymore, is it?
No, not at all. We've seen how DNA actively shapes our bodies, it drives evolution, and we're even using it for all these cutting edge technologies.
Yeah.
But there's one more area I think you'll find fascinating,
Yeah.
and it's the intersection of DNA and nanotechnology.
Nanotechnology. I admit I usually associate that with like tiny robots and futuristic materials.
Right.
How does DNA even fit into that?
Well, remember we were talking about DNA's ability to self-assemble?
Yes.
It's not just about replicating itself.
Right.
It can actually form very specific shapes,
Right.
all based on those base pairing rules.
Yeah. A with T, C with G.
Exactly. And scientists are basically using this like a nanoscale construction kit.
So instead of bricks and mortar,
Yeah.
we're using A, T, C, and G to build things.
Exactly.
That's pretty wild.
It's wild, and they're building all sorts of things. Everything from these tiny DNA boxes to
Wow.
really intricate structures. They're called DNA origami.
DNA origami.
Yeah, imagine folding a single strand of DNA into all these complex shapes,
Right.
guided by those base pairing interactions.
That sounds beautiful.
It's almost like molecular art.
So DNA origami.
DNA origami, yeah.
Okay, but what's the practical application here?
Yeah.
Sounds really cool.
It does.
But is it more than just visually impressive?
Oh, absolutely. Think about things like delivering drugs to specific cells in the body.
Okay.
So you could create like a DNA nanocage that carries the drug,
Okay.
and it only releases it when it encounters that target cell.
Wow.
Or how about biosensors that use DNA to detect very specific molecules,
Okay.
and this could help us diagnose diseases much earlier.
So we're moving beyond DNA as just information storage
Right.
to DNA as like a functional material.
Exactly.
It's almost like we're learning a new language using DNA to build and control things at this tiny level.
That's a fantastic way to put it. And this is just the beginning. Some researchers are even thinking about building molecular computers using DNA.
Wow. It's incredible to think about all the ways DNA is shaping the future, from medicine to information technology,
It really is.
and now nanotechnology.
It's amazing, right?
But with all this talk about manipulating and engineering DNA, it's easy to forget about its core role as like the blueprint of life.
Right.
What are some of the big unanswered questions that scientists are still struggling with when it comes to understanding DNA's role in evolution and the diversity of life on Earth?
I think one of the biggest mysteries out there is still this so-called dark matter of DNA. All those non-coding regions that don't directly make proteins.
Right. Right.
We talked about some possible functions like regulating gene expression or maintaining the structure of chromosomes. But honestly, there's still so much we just don't know.
It's humbling to think that most of our DNA's function is still a mystery.
It really is.
So, what are some of the ways that scientists are approaching this dark matter? Like, how are they trying to figure it out?
They're comparing genomes across different species,
Okay.
looking for patterns and clues. They're also studying how those non-coding regions interact with proteins and other molecules within the cell. And thankfully, new technologies are allowing us to study gene expression at a level of detail that we've never been able to before. So we're starting to see how those non-coding regions might be influencing which genes are turned on or off.
So, it's like piecing together this giant puzzle,
It really is
and each new discovery about non coding DNA gives us another piece.
a new clue.
But I've got to ask, with all this focus on like the cutting edge, are there still fundamental questions about DNA's role in evolution that we haven't answered yet?
Oh, for sure. Like, how did DNA even become the dominant genetic material in the first place?
Right.
We talked about the RNA world hypothesis, but the transition from RNA to DNA is still a mystery.
It's fascinating to think that even with everything we've learned, DNA still holds so many secrets. It reminds us that science is a journey of continuous discovery, and that's what makes it so exciting.
I couldn't agree more. And as we continue to delve deeper into the mysteries of DNA, we're not just uncovering scientific knowledge, we're gaining a deeper understanding of ourselves, our connection to all life on Earth, and our place in this vast tapestry of evolution.
This deep dive into DNA has been incredible.
It has.
From its fundamental structure to its role in shaping life as we know it, and all the amazing technologies that it's enabling. It's clear that DNA is not just a molecule of the past, preserving the history of life.
Right.
It's a molecule of the future, shaping the world to come.
I love that.
It's been a pleasure exploring these topics with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring, questioning, and marveling at the wonders of DNA.